There is an apartment on the 39th floor of the Waldorf Towers in Manhattan that once belonged to the most powerful gangster in America. Not officially, not on any lease with his real name, but the apartment, 39C to be exact, was his. Paid for in cash, protected by bribes, hidden behind the alias Charles Ross. And for 4 years in the mid-1930s, that apartment was the nerve center of organized crime in the United States. Lucky Luciano lived there. And shortly after the death of Dutch Schultz in October 1935, Luciano invited another man to that apartment. A man who had survived the bloodiest gang war Harlem had ever seen. A man who now controlled the numbers racket in Black New York. Bumpy Johnson. This is the story of what happened in that apartment, of the fortune that was never found, of the chess games that masked treasure hunts, of the bad energy that even Lucky Luciano, a man who had survived being stabbed, beaten, and left for dead on a Staten Island beach, could feel in his bones. And of why, not long after, a streak of catastrophic events forced Lucky to flee that apartment and spend the rest of his life in exile, 3,000 miles away, never to return to America again. The Waldorf Astoria opened on Park Avenue in October 1931, and it wasn't just a hotel. It was a statement. The tallest hotel in the world. 47 stories, covering an entire city block between 49th and 50th Streets, from Park Avenue to Lexington Avenue. The building had 2,253 rooms, including 500 deluxe suites and 300 parlors. Every detail was Art Deco opulence executed at a scale that had never been attempted before. The main lobby featured marble imported from Italy. The floors were inlaid with intricate geometric patterns. The ceilings soared 20 feet high, supported by columns wrapped in polished bronze. Crystal chandeliers, each weighing thousands of pounds, hung from gilded rosettes. The walls were covered in hand-painted murals depicting scenes from mythology and history. This was the Gilded Age reborn in steel and stone. This was luxury as architecture. This was power made visible. The hotel contained innovations that would define modern hospitality for the next century. It had phones that rang automatically, a first for its time, teletype devices in the business center, a telephone extension in each of the 1,552 bedroom suites, a telephone switchboard that served 2,535 extensions, radios in all 2,000 guest rooms and in 15 public rooms, connected by 190 miles of wire. It had a private railroad siding beneath the building, accessed through a secret entrance in the basement, so that presidents and dignitaries could arrive unseen, stepping off trains directly into the hotel's subterranean corridors. It had the largest hotel kitchen in America, located on the second floor to accommodate the railroad tracks below. It had ballrooms that could seat 2,100 guests for dinner. It had a rooftop nightclub, the Starlight Roof. That became the most famous venue in New York City for live music and dancing. And on the top 14 floors, 28 through 42, were the Waldorf Towers, a hotel within a hotel, a palace within a palace. These weren't rooms, these were residences, long-term suites for the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world. Presidents lived there. Herbert Hoover kept an apartment on the 31st floor. Ambassadors, heads of state, corporate titans like John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Henry Ford, old money aristocrats who treated the towers like a vertical Beverly Hills, where you could step out of your $50 million apartment and run into Frank Sinatra in the elevator. The towers had their own private entrance on 50th Street, their own elevators, faster, quieter, more luxurious than the public elevators in the main hotel, their own staff, their own concierge. If you lived in the Waldorf Towers, you did not mix with the guests on the lower floors. You were insulated, protected, invisible. The towers offered something unprecedented in New York City. The privacy and permanence of home combined with the services of a world-class hotel. Maid service, room service, valet, laundry, everything handled by staff who were trained to be seen only when needed and to vanish the moment you no longer needed them. Living in the Waldorf Towers meant never having to worry about maintaining a residence, never dealing with repairs or utilities or property taxes. You simply lived. And the building took care of everything else for the right price. And in 1932, a man calling himself Charles Ross moved into apartment 39C. Charles Ross did not exist. The man who signed the lease was Salvatore "Lucky" Luciano. Born in Sicily, raised in the Lower East Side tenements of New York, a man who had clawed his way out of poverty through bootlegging, extortion, and murder. A man who, by 1931, had become the chairman of the Commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia. Lucky Luciano was the boss of bosses, and he wanted the world to know it. So he moved into the Waldorf Towers, into the most luxurious hotel in the world, into an apartment worth more per month than most Americans earned in a year. And from that palace in the sky, he ran the largest criminal empire in the United States. The location, the Waldorf Astoria. New York sits at 301 Park Avenue, between 49th and 50th Streets in Midtown Manhattan. The building occupies a full city block, from Park Avenue on the west to Lexington Avenue on the east, covering approximately 80,000 square feet of Manhattan real estate. The Waldorf Towers' private entrance was and still is on 51st Street, just steps from Lexington Avenue. A discreet doorway, a brass plaque, a doorman who knew every resident by name and every visitor by reputation. This was the entrance Lucky Luciano used every day. Not the grand entrance on Park Avenue, where tourists and hotel guests arrived beneath the famous porte cochere. Not the revolving doors that led into the marble lobby. Lucky used the side entrance, the private entrance, the entrance reserved for residents who valued discretion above all else. Apartment 39C was not the penthouse. It wasn't the most expensive suite in the building, but it was high enough, 39 floors above the street. High enough that when you looked out the windows, you could see the entire city sprawled beneath you like a map you owned. And Lucky did own it. The apartment itself was massive by any standard. Approximately 2,400 square feet of luxury living space, multiple bedrooms, a full dining room, a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Park Avenue, marble bathrooms with gold fixtures, parquet floors imported from France, crown molding, crystal chandeliers, custom-built closets large enough to walk into. This wasn't a hotel room. This was a residence. A palace in the sky. The Waldorf Towers had been designed specifically for this purpose, permanent residences for the ultra-wealthy who wanted hotel services without the transience of hotel life. About 1/3 of the 100 suites in the towers were leased as private homes. The rest were available for short-term guests willing to pay extraordinary sums for extraordinary accommodations. And everything in those apartments was extraordinary. The kitchen in 39C had been custom designed with the finest appliances money could buy in 1932. Refrigeration, a gas range with 6 burners, marble countertops, cabinets built from mahogany, a walk-in pantry stocked daily by the hotel's staff. The bathrooms featured deep soaking tubs, separate showers with multiple heads, heated towel racks, and full-length mirrors framed in polished brass. The toilet was European. The sink fixtures were custom cast. The living room had space for a full dining table that could seat 12. The furniture was Art Deco, sleek lines, geometric patterns, polished wood and chrome. The curtains were velvet. The rugs were Persian. And at the center of it all, by the window overlooking Park Avenue, was where Lucky Luciano set up his chessboard. From that apartment, he ran every racket in New York: bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, narcotics, the numbers game, everything. His criminal empire generated millions of dollars a year, tens of millions, and Lucky lived like royalty: custom suits, chauffeur-driven cars, private elevators, a maid who came daily, a valet who ensured his shoes were always polished, the finest food money could buy, delivered by room service on silver trays, women, celebrities, parties that lasted until dawn. He entertained Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, and and every other major figure in organized crime in that apartment. They would arrive through the tower's private entrance, take the private elevator to the 39th floor, walk down the carpeted hallway, knock on 39C, and Lucky would open the door, impeccably dressed, a glass of bourbon in his hand, and welcome them into the nerve center of the mob. Now let's talk about what this apartment cost. The exact rent Lucky paid for apartment 39C was never publicly documented. He wasn't exactly filing tax returns with accurate income disclosures. But we know from historical records that luxury suites in the Waldorf Towers during the 1930s rented for anywhere from $200 to $600 per month, depending on size, location, and amenities. Lucky's apartment, 2,400 square feet on the 39th floor with Park Avenue views, would have commanded premium pricing. Let's conservatively estimate he was paying $800 per month in rent. But here's the thing, Lucky wasn't paying rent like a normal tenant. He was paying rent like a man who needed absolute discretion, absolute protection, absolute loyalty. So he put the desk clerk on his payroll, $300 a month, every month, cash. That bribe, $300 per month to one clerk, was more than most working-class Americans earned in a year during the Great Depression. But for Lucky, it was a small price to pay for security. When federal agents came asking questions, the desk clerk would say, "Charles Ross, never heard of him." When prosecutors tried to prove Lucky lived at the Waldorf, the desk clerk would testify he'd never seen him. The bribe bought silence. It bought loyalty. It bought Tim. Add it all up, $800 per month rent plus $300 per month bribe equals $1,100 per month total cost. In 2026 dollars, adjusted for inflation, Lucky Luciano was spending approximately $25,000 to $30,000 per month just to maintain his apartment in the Waldorf Towers. That's $300,000 to $360,000 per year for 4 years for one apartment. But it wasn't just an apartment. It was a fortress, a command center, a symbol of power so audacious that even the FBI, who knew exactly where Lucky lived, couldn't touch him without hard evidence. And inside that 2,400 square foot palace, surrounded by marble and mahogany and crystal, Lucky Luciano sat at his chessboard and plotted the moves that controlled the entire underworld of New York City. On October 23, 1935, Arthur Dutch Schultz Flegenheimer was sitting in the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey, having dinner with 3 of his associates. At approximately 10:20 p.m., 2 hitmen walked in, Charles the Bug Workman and Emmanuel Mendy Weiss. They shot all 4 men. Dutch Schultz staggered into the bathroom where he was hit in the abdomen by a .45 caliber bullet. He collapsed on the floor, bleeding out, while his 3 associates died in the dining room. Schultz was rushed to the hospital. He lingered for nearly 24 hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, babbling incoherently while a police stenographer recorded every word he said. Oh, dog biscuit, and when he is happy he doesn't get snappy. Don't let Satan draw you too fast. A boy has never wept, nor dashed 1,000 kin. On October 24, 1935, at 8:35 p.m., Dutch Schultz died. He was 33 years old, and he took a secret with him. Before Dutch was shot, he had been facing federal indictment for tax evasion. Thomas Dewey, the same prosecutor who would later bring down Lucky Luciano, was closing in on him. Dutch knew that if he was convicted, he was going to prison for a long time, maybe forever. So he did what any smart criminal would do. He hid his money. According to his lawyer, Dixie Davis, Dutch obtained a steel strongbox sometime in 1933 or early 1934. He stuffed it with cash, diamonds, gold coins, bonds, and jewelry. The exact amount has never been confirmed, but estimates range from $5 million to $9 million in 1935 dollars. In today's money, that's somewhere between $100 million and $180 million. Then, Dutch and his bodyguard, Bernard Lulu Rosenkrantz, drove the strongbox upstate to the Catskills, specifically to an area near Phoenicia, New York, where Dutch had run bootlegging operations during Prohibition. He knew the area. He had hideouts there. He had friends there. And somewhere near Esopus Creek, Dutch Schultz buried his fortune. Only 2 people knew where it was, Dutch and Lulu. And on October 23, 1935, both of them were shot dead at the Palace Chop House. The location of the treasure died with them. 5 months later, March 1936, Lucky Luciano was still living in apartment 39C at the Waldorf Towers. And he was thinking about Dutch Schultz's fortune. Everyone in the underworld was thinking about it. The story had spread immediately after Dutch's death. A steel strongbox, millions in cash and diamonds, buried somewhere in the Catskills. No map, no instructions, just the delirious ramblings of a dying man who may or may not have been dropping clues. Don't let Satan draw you too fast. Phoenicia had landmarks with names like Devil's Tombstone and Devil's Face. Was Dutch trying to tell them something, or was he just out of his mind with fever and pain? No one knew. But Lucky knew one thing for certain. If anyone was going to find that treasure, it would require patience, intelligence, and the ability to think like Dutch Schultz. And Lucky knew exactly who had those qualities. So he sent word to Harlem. He wanted to meet with Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson was not a man who visited the Waldorf Towers casually. He had been there before. Business meetings, always discreet, always brief. But this invitation was different. This was personal. The message came through Frank Costello. Lucky wanted to see Bumpy. Not in some back room in Harlem, not in some restaurant in the Bronx, in the Waldorf Towers. Apartment 39C, Saturday afternoon. Come alone. Bumpy dressed carefully, custom suit, polished shoes, fedora angled just right. He took a cab to 51st Street, walked through the tower's private entrance, and stepped into the elevator, 39 floors. The elevator doors opened onto a carpeted hallway, quiet, elegant, the kind of silence that only money can buy. Bumpy walked to apartment 39C and knocked. Lucky opened the door himself. No bodyguards, no associates, just Lucky, standing there in shirt sleeves and suspenders, a glass of bourbon in his hand, and a chessboard set up on the table by the window. "Bumpy," Lucky said, smiling. "Come in." Lucky Luciano did not invite Bumpy Johnson to the Waldorf Towers to play chess. But that's what they did. For hours. Every Saturday afternoon for weeks. The routine was always the same. Bumpy would arrive. Lucky would pour 2 glasses of bourbon. They would sit at the table by the window, 39 floors above Park Avenue, and play chess while they talked. About Harlem, about the numbers racket, about the commission, about politics and power, and the delicate balance of territory and tribute, and eventually about Dutch Schultz. Lucky brought it up during their 3rd game. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Lucky said, moving his bishop across the board. Bumpy studied the position. "Dutch. Yeah. The money. Yeah." Lucky leaned back in his chair. $5 million, Bumpy. Maybe more. Sitting in a box somewhere in the woods, just sitting there, waiting. Bumpy moved his knight. "You think it's real?" "I think Dutch wasn't stupid," Lucky said. "He knew Dewey was going to get him. He knew the feds were going to freeze his accounts. So yeah, I think he hid it. I think it's out there. And you want to find it. I want to know if it can be found." Bumpy took a sip of bourbon. "You've got men who can dig." "I don't need men who can dig," Lucky said. "I need someone who can think." He moved his rook. Check. Bumpy studied the board. Then he looked up at Lucky. "Where do you think he buried it?" Lucky smiled. "That's the question." They spent the next several weeks going over everything they knew. Dutch had run bootlegging operations all over the Catskills. He had stills, safe houses, farms, warehouses. He knew the area like the back of his hand. But where would he bury a fortune? Lucky had a theory. Dutch had a turkey farm up near Phoenicia. He used it as a front for his bootlegging operation. "If I was Dutch, that's where I'd bury it. Somewhere on my own land. Somewhere I could keep an eye on it." Bumpy considered this. "You checked the farm?" "Sent some boys up there last month. They dug all over the property, found nothing." "Maybe he didn't bury it on the farm." "Then where?" Bumpy moved his queen. "Dutch said something before he died. Don't let Satan draw you too fast. Phoenicia's got a place called Devil's Tombstone, a big boulder. People say that's what he was talking about." Lucky nodded. "I've heard that. Sent men there, too. They dug around the boulder. Nothing." "Maybe it's not about where the devil is," Bumpy said. "Maybe it's about where you can see the devil from." Lucky stared at him. Bumpy continued. "If you're Dutch and you're burying $5 million, you don't bury it in the most obvious spot. You bury it somewhere only you would think to look. Somewhere with a landmark you can see, a reference point." "The Devil's Face," Lucky said. "Yeah." The Devil's Face was a rock formation on a cliffside near Phoenicia. From certain angles, it looked like a demonic profile carved into the stone. Local legend said the devil had left his mark there. "You bury the money somewhere you can see the devil's face from," Bumpy said. "That way, you always know exactly where it is. You don't need a map. You just need to know where to stand." Lucky leaned forward. "That's smart. That's how Dutch would think." Checkmate. Lucky looked down at the board. He'd lost. He smiled. "You're good at this. It's just chess." "No," Lucky said. "It's not." Over the following months, Lucky sent 3 separate expeditions to the Catskills. The first team went in late March 1936. 5 men. Shovels. Metal detectors, crude ones, but functional. They searched a 10-acre radius around Devil's Tombstone. They dug 27 holes, some shallow, some 6 feet deep. They found old bootlegging equipment, rusted stills, broken bottles, the remnants of Dutch's empire, but no strongbox. The second team went in April. This time Lucky sent men who knew the area, men who had worked for Dutch during Prohibition, men who remembered where the safe houses were, where the stash houses had been, where Dutch had hidden whiskey shipments from the feds. They checked every location, barns, sheds, root cellars. They lifted floorboards. They pulled apart walls. They dug beneath old fire pits and abandoned cabins. Nothing. The third expedition was different. Lucky didn't send thugs with shovels. He sent Meyer Lansky. Meyer was the accountant, the thinker, the man who understood how Dutch's mind worked because he'd worked alongside Dutch for years during Prohibition. If anyone could figure out where Dutch had hidden his fortune, it was Meyer. Meyer spent 2 weeks in Phoenicia in May 1936. He didn't dig. He studied. He walked the land. He visited the turkey farm. He stood at Devil's Tombstone and looked at the landscape from every angle. He measured distances. He took notes. When he returned to New York, he came to apartment 39C to deliver his report. Lucky and Bumpy were playing chess when Meyer arrived. Lucky poured him a bourbon and gestured to a chair by the window. "Tell me you found it," Lucky said. Meyer shook his head. "It's not there." "What do you mean it's not there?" "I mean," Meyer said, taking a sip of bourbon, "that if Dutch buried $5 million anywhere near Phoenicia, he did it in a place so obscure, so unmarked, that the only way to find it would be pure luck. And Dutch didn't believe in luck." Lucky leaned back. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Meyer said carefully, "that maybe Dutch didn't bury it in Phoenicia at all." Bumpy looked up from the chessboard. "Where? Then?" Meyer hesitated. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He spread it on the table between them. It was a hand-drawn map of Manhattan. "Dutch ran his operation from here," Meyer said, pointing to a spot in Midtown. "He had offices, safe houses, fronts. He was in this city every single day. If I was Dutch, and I knew the feds were closing in, I wouldn't drive 2 hours upstate to bury my money. I'd hide it somewhere I could reach it in 10 minutes. "You think it's in the city?" Lucky said. "I think it's possible." "Where?" Meyer shrugged. "That's the question." Bumpy studied the map. Then he looked at Lucky. "When did Dutch bury the money?" "Sometime in 1933 or 34, Lucky said, "before the feds started watching him closely." "And where was he living then?" Meyer answered. "He had a penthouse on 5th Avenue, Upper East Side, overlooking Central Park." Bumpy tapped the map. "Then maybe the money's not in Phoenicia. Maybe it's in Central Park." The room went silent. Lucky stared at the map. Central Park, 343 acres, right in the middle of Manhattan. 1 million places to bury a strongbox, and millions of people walking through it every single day, never knowing they were walking over $100 million in cash and diamonds. "Jesus Christ," Lucky said softly. Meyer nodded. "If it's there, it's never been found because no one's been looking in the right place." "We can't dig up Central Park," Lucky said. "No," Meyer agreed. "You can't." Bumpy moved his rook. "Then the treasure stays buried." Lucky looked at him. "You giving up?" "I'm being realistic," Bumpy said. "Dutch died with the secret. Lulu died with the secret. Meyer just told you it could be anywhere in a 300-acre park in the middle of the most crowded city in America. You can't find it, Lucky. No one can." "Someone will," Lucky said. "Maybe," Bumpy said, "but not you." Checkmate. Lucky had lost again. The chess games continued through the spring of 1936. But something changed in apartment 39C. Bumpy felt it first. It was subtle at first, a heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched, the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room and know instinctively that something is wrong, even if you can't see it. Bumpy mentioned it casually one afternoon. "You ever feel like this place has bad energy?" Lucky laughed. "Bad energy? The fuck are you talking about?" "I don't know how to explain it," Bumpy said. "It just feels wrong." Lucky waved him off. "It's a hotel. It's got 47 floors and 2,000 guests. You're feeling the collective neuroses of rich people." But Bumpy wasn't wrong. Over the next few weeks, things started happening in apartment 39C. Small things at first. Doors that wouldn't stay closed, lights that flickered, the faint smell of cologne that Lucky didn't wear, sounds in the middle of the night, footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment when Lucky knew no one was there. Lucky tried to ignore it. He was Lucky Luciano. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or bad energy. He believed in money and power and the sharp edge of a knife. But the feeling persisted. The first real incident happened on a Tuesday night in early April. Lucky was alone in the apartment. His bodyguards were stationed in the hallway. The door was locked. The windows were closed. He was sitting in his chair by the window, reading a newspaper, when he heard it. A voice, faint, distant, coming from the bedroom. "Don't let Satan draw you too fast." Lucky froze. He stood up slowly, folded the newspaper, and walked to the bedroom. The door was half open. The room was dark. "Hello?" Lucky called out. Nothing. He flipped the light switch. The bedroom was empty. No one was there. The closet was closed. The windows were locked from the inside. Lucky stood in the doorway for a full minute, listening. Silence. He turned off the light and went back to his chair. But he didn't sleep that night. The second incident happened a week later. Bumpy was there this time. They were playing chess. It was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the apartment. The chessboard sat on the table by the window. Bumpy was winning, he usually was, and Lucky was studying the board, trying to find a way out of checkmate. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer door inside the apartment. Bumpy looked up. "You feel that?" Lucky nodded. His breath was visible in the air. Then they heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the hallway inside the apartment, the hallway that led to the bedroom, the hallway where no one was standing. Lucky stood up. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Bumpy didn't move. He stared at the hallway, his hand resting on the table, ready. Lucky walked toward the hallway. He pulled a knife from his jacket pocket, not his usual switchblade, but a fixed blade he kept for situations like this. He moved slowly, quietly, until he reached the hallway entrance. He looked down the corridor. Empty. No one was there. But at the far end of the hallway, the bedroom door, which Lucky had closed that morning, was now open. "You leave that door open?" Lucky called back to Bumpy. "I didn't touch it," Bumpy said. Lucky walked down the hallway and looked into the bedroom. The room was freezing, colder than the rest of the apartment. The windows were still closed. The radiator was off. There was no logical explanation for the temperature. And on the bed, Lucky's bed, where he slept every night, there was a single word written in the dust that had accumulated on the dark comforter. Phoenicia. Lucky stared at it for a long time. Then he walked back to the living room, sat down at the chessboard, and poured himself a double bourbon. "What did you see?" Bumpy asked. "Nothing," Lucky said. Bumpy studied him. Then he looked at the hallway. "You're lying." "Yeah," Lucky admitted. "I am." "What was it?" Lucky drank the bourbon in one swallow. "A message." "From who?" "From a dead man." Bumpy didn't ask any more questions. He moved his queen checkmate. Lucky didn't even look at the board. He was staring out the window at the city below, thinking about a man who had died 6 months ago in a hospital in Newark, babbling about dog biscuits and Satan and secrets he would never share. And Lucky realized something that sent a chill through him, colder than anything he'd felt in that apartment. Dutch Schultz wasn't in Phoenicia. Dutch Schultz was here. The incidents escalated. Frank Costello visited apartment 39C in late April. He arrived at 7 p.m. for a business meeting. By 7:45, he was ready to leave. "What the hell is wrong with this place?" Frank asked as he stood by the door, putting on his coat. "What do you mean?" Lucky said. "I mean it feels like someone's watching us," Frank said. "The whole time I've been here, I've felt eyes on the back of my neck, and it's cold. You got the heat on?" Yeah. Well, it don't feel like it. After Frank left, Lucky walked through the apartment. Every room, every closet, every corner, he found nothing, but the feeling persisted. The sense that someone, something, was in the apartment with him, watching, waiting. Vito Genovese came by in early May. He stayed for 10 minutes. Then he made an excuse and left. As he was walking out, he pulled Lucky aside in the hallway. "Lucky," Vito said quietly, "you need to move." "Move? Why?" Vito glanced back at the apartment. "Because whatever's in there, it ain't good." "You believe in ghosts now, Vito?" "I believe in bad luck," Vito said, "and you're living in it." Lucky laughed it off. But after Vito left, he stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the door to apartment 39C. And for the first time since he'd moved into the Waldorf Towers, Luciano felt afraid. Not of the FBI, not of Thomas Dewey, not of rival gangsters or betrayals or violence. He was afraid of the apartment itself. Because deep down, he knew Bumpy was right. There was something wrong with this place, something that had been wrong from the moment he'd started searching for Dutch Schultz's treasure. And whatever it wasn't going to let him go. And then, in May 1936, everything started to fall apart. It started on May 11, 1936, when Lucky's trial began. Thomas Dewey, the prosecutor who had gone after Dutch Schultz, had turned his attention to Luciano. Specifically, to Lucky's role in running a massive prostitution ring across New York City. The charges were compulsory prostitution, 62 counts. Lucky had been arrested in Hot Springs, Arkansas, in April after fleeing the Waldorf when the desk clerk tipped him off that detectives were on their way up. He'd been extradited back to New York, and now he was sitting in a courtroom facing a prosecutor who had made a career out of destroying gangsters. The trial was a disaster. Dewey paraded witness after witness to the stand. Prostitutes, madams, bookkeepers, all of them testifying that Lucky was the boss, that he controlled everything, that he made millions off the suffering of women. Lucky's lawyers tried to fight back. They cross-examined. They objected. They argued. It didn't matter. On June 7, 1936, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all 62 counts. Lucky Luciano, the most powerful gangster in America, was convicted. On June 18, 1936, Judge Philip McCook sentenced him to 30 to 50 years in state prison, the longest sentence for compulsory prostitution in New York history. Lucky was sent to Sing Sing. Then, a few months later, he was transferred to Clinton Prison in Dannemora, New York, a maximum security facility on the Canadian border, nicknamed Little Siberia because of its brutal winters and isolation. Lucky Luciano would spend the next 10 years in prison, and he would never see apartment 39C again. But the bad luck didn't stop there. In 1937, while Lucky was locked up in Dannemora, Frank Costello, Lucky's second-in-command, was indicted on tax evasion charges. In 1938, Vito Genovese, another top lieutenant, fled to Italy to avoid murder charges. In 1940, the federal government began a massive crackdown on organized crime, targeting every major racket in New York. The empire that Lucky had built from apartment 39C was crumbling, and Lucky, sitting in a freezing cell in upstate New York, couldn't do anything to stop it. In 1946, Lucky Luciano's sentence was commuted, not pardoned, commuted, with one condition: immediate deportation to Italy, permanently. The official reason was that Lucky had helped the U.S. Navy during World War II by using his connections on the New York waterfront to prevent sabotage and gather intelligence in Sicily before the Allied invasion. The unofficial reason was that Thomas Dewey, now the governor of New York, wanted Lucky Luciano out of the country forever. On February 9, 1946, Lucky was transferred from Great Meadow Prison to Sing Sing, then taken to Pier 7 in Brooklyn and placed aboard a ship bound for Italy. He would never return to the United States. He tried. In 1947, he moved to Havana, Cuba, close enough to the U.S. that he could theoretically manage his empire from across the water. But the U.S. government found out and pressured the Cuban government to deport him back to Italy. So Lucky spent the rest of his life in exile. Naples, Rome, a beautiful apartment overlooking the Mediterranean. Plenty of money, plenty of women, plenty of wine. But he was 3,000 miles away from the city he had once ruled, and he would die in Italy in 1962, never having set foot in New York again. In 1968, 2 years before Lucky's death, but after Bumpy Johnson had already died, a story emerged from someone who claimed to have been in apartment 39C during one of those chess games. The source was unreliable. The details were vague. But the story went like this. During one of their final meetings, the last time Bumpy ever set foot in that apartment, Bumpy told Lucky something that haunted him for the rest of his life. "You should leave this apartment," Bumpy said. "Why?" Lucky asked. "Because whatever's here, it doesn't want you here." Lucky laughed. "You still on that bad energy bullshit?" "I'm serious," Bumpy said. "Dutch died looking for something he couldn't take with him, and you're sitting here trying to find it. You think that doesn't leave a mark?" "It's just money, Bumpy." "No," Bumpy said. "It's not." Lucky poured another glass of bourbon. "So what, you think Dutch's ghost is haunting this apartment because I'm trying to find his treasure?" Bumpy was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to the window. 39 floors below, the city glittered in the twilight. Millions of people, millions of lives, all of them moving through the same streets where Dutch Schultz had once walked, where Lucky Luciano had once ruled, where fortunes had been made and lost and buried. "You know what I think?" Bumpy said, his back to Lucky. "I think Dutch knew he was going to die. I think he knew the commission was coming for him, and he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it, so he did the only thing he could do. He made sure no one would ever have his money." "He buried it," Lucky said. "No." Bumpy turned around. "He cursed it." Lucky stared at him. "Think about it," Bumpy continued. "Dutch dies babbling about Satan and dog biscuits and a boy who never wept. Everyone thinks he's out of his mind with fever. But what if he wasn't? What if he was casting a spell? What if he was making sure that anyone who tried to find his money would pay for it?" "That's superstition," Lucky said. "Is it?" Bumpy gestured around the apartment. "Then explain this. Explain the footsteps. Explain the cold. Explain why every person who comes to this apartment feels like they're being watched. Explain why Frank left early. Why Vito told you to move. Why Meyer spent 2 weeks in Phoenicia and came back saying the treasure isn't there." "Meyer came back saying he couldn't find it." "No," Bumpy said. "He came back saying it's not there. That's different. He's telling you that Dutch didn't bury it in Phoenicia. He's telling you the treasure is somewhere else. And you know where I think it is?" Lucky didn't answer. "I think it's here," Bumpy said. "In this building. Maybe in this apartment. Maybe in the walls. Maybe under the floor. Somewhere Dutch could get to it quickly if he needed to. Somewhere close. Somewhere he visited." "Dutch never lived in the Waldorf," Lucky said. "No, but he knew people who did. He had friends here, business partners. He came to this building. Maybe not often, but he came." Lucky thought about this. It was possible. Dutch had connections all over Manhattan. He'd had offices, safe houses, and the Waldorf Astoria had been open for years before Dutch died. It wasn't impossible that Dutch had visited the building, that he'd seen apartment 39C, that he'd— "You're playing with something you don't understand," Bumpy said, interrupting Lucky's thoughts. and I think if you keep playing, you're going to lose." "I don't lose." "You already are," Bumpy said. "You just don't see it yet." Bumpy picked up his coat and hat. He walked to the door. Then he stopped and turned back. "Lucky," he said. "I've known you for 10 years. We've done business together. We've respected each other. So I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen." Lucky waited. "Get out of this apartment," Bumpy said. "Tonight. Pack your things and leave. Don't come back. Don't look for the treasure. Don't think about Dutch Schultz. Just walk away." "I can't," Lucky said. "Why not?" "Because if I walk away, everyone will know. The commission. The other bosses. They'll think I'm weak. They'll think I'm scared." "You should be scared," Bumpy said. "Of what? A ghost?" "Of consequences," Bumpy said. "Dutch cursed that money. I don't know how. I don't know why. But he did. And anyone who goes looking for it is going to pay the price. You've already paid some of it. The cold, the voices, the feeling that you're being watched. But that's just the beginning. If you stay here, if you keep looking, it's going to get worse." "How much worse?" Bumpy looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You're going to lose everything." Lucky laughed. But it was a hollow sound. No humor in it, just bravado, covering fear. "I'll take my chances," Lucky said. Bumpy shook his head. "Yeah, I figured you would." He opened the door and walked out. Lucky stood there in the doorway, watching Bumpy walk down the hallway to the elevator. The carpet muffled his footsteps. The hallway was silent except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Bumpy pressed the elevator button and waited. The doors opened. He stepped inside. Then he turned and looked at Lucky one last time. "One more thing," Bumpy said. "What?" "When it happens, when you lose everything, don't say I didn't warn you." The elevator doors closed. Lucky never saw him again. 3 months later, almost to the day, federal agents arrested Lucky Luciano on prostitution charges. The trial that destroyed him began in May, and everything Bumpy had warned him about came true. The conviction, the 30 to 50-year sentence, the transfer to Dannemora, the years in isolation, the commutation with deportation, the exile in Italy, all of it. Later, much later, when Lucky was sitting in a villa in Naples, staring out at the Mediterranean, living in comfortable exile 3,000 miles from the city he'd once controlled, he thought about that last conversation with Bumpy. "Get out of this apartment. Tonight. Don't look for the treasure." But Lucky hadn't listened, and now he was paying the price. The question that haunted him, the question that kept him awake at night in Italy, the question he never spoke aloud to anyone, was this: had Dutch Schultz really cursed his treasure, or had Lucky Luciano simply destroyed himself by chasing something that was never meant to be found? The answer, Lucky realized, didn't matter. The result was the same. After Lucky left, Apartment 39C became a problem for the Waldorf Towers. No one wanted to rent it. Not because of Lucky's criminal history. Most of the residents in the towers didn't care about that. Rich people and gangsters had coexisted in that building for years. No, the problem was simpler. People who stayed in 39C didn't sleep well. They heard footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, the smell of cologne that no one wore, a heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe. The towers tried to downplay it. They cleaned the apartment, repainted, changed the locks, replaced the furniture. It didn't matter. Tenants would move in, then they'd move out a few months later. By the 1950s, Apartment 39C had developed a reputation among the tower's long-term residents. It was the apartment people avoided. The floor people didn't visit unless they had to. Some claimed it was haunted by Dutch Schultz. Others said it was the ghosts of the men Lucky had killed. Others said it was just the residue of all that power and violence and fear soaked into the walls like stale smoke. No one knew for sure. But everyone agreed on one thing. There was something wrong with apartment 39C. As of 2026, Dutch Schultz's treasure has never been found. People have been searching for it for 90 years. Treasure hunters have descended on Phoenicia with metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, satellite maps, and excavation equipment. They've dug around Devil's Tombstone. They've searched the turkey farm. They've scoured Esopus Creek. Nothing. In 2020, PBS aired a documentary called Secrets of the Dead, Gangsters' Gold, following 3 teams of treasure hunters as they searched for Dutch's fortune. They found tunnels. They found old bootlegging equipment. They found hidden rooms. But they didn't find the treasure. The mystery endures. And here's the thing that haunts every treasure hunter who has ever looked for Dutch Schultz's money. What if it was never buried in the Catskills at all? What if Lulu Rosenkrantz lied? What if Dutch hid it somewhere else entirely? Somewhere no one would think to look. What if the treasure isn't in Phoenicia? What if it's in New York City? In a building? In a wall? In a floor? What if Dutch Schultz's fortune is still sitting somewhere in the Waldorf Towers, buried beneath apartment 39C, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to tear up the floorboards and find out? Lucky Luciano spent 4 years living above it, playing chess above it, making plans above it, and he never found it. Bumpy Johnson walked into that apartment and felt the bad energy, felt the weight of something unfinished, something buried, something cursed, and he told Lucky to leave. Lucky didn't listen, and look what happened to him. Epilogue. What remains? The Waldorf Astoria closed for renovations in 2017. The upper floors, the Waldorf Towers, were converted into luxury condominiums. The Art Deco facade was preserved. The public spaces were restored. But apartment 39C no longer exists as it once did. The floor plan was reconfigured. The walls were torn down. The apartment that Lucky Luciano once called home is now part of a different unit entirely. Construction crews worked on that floor for months, stripping wallpaper, ripping out fixtures, tearing up floorboards. Did they find anything? No one knows. The developers aren't talking. The construction crews signed NDAs. The building's management doesn't discuss the renovation in detail. But if you talk to the right people, the ones who worked on that floor, the ones who spent weeks in those empty apartments, they'll tell you the same thing Bumpy Johnson said in 1936. There's bad energy in that place, and maybe, just maybe, it's because Dutch Schultz's treasure is still there, waiting, watching, cursed. That wraps it up for today. Lucky Luciano paid the equivalent of $12,000 a month to live in a building so tall that people could be thrown from the windows and not survive. Bumpy Johnson played chess in that apartment and felt something so wrong that he told the most powerful gangster in America to leave. And Dutch Schultz's $100 million fortune has never been found, despite 90 years of searching. 3 men, 1 apartment, 1 mystery that has never been solved. If this story unsettled you, that means it worked. Drop a comment below and tell me which part hit the hardest. Subscribe for more stories from the places history doesn't want you to see. See you in the next one.